This is Ivy Unleashed, a Gold Ivy production. Welcome back to the Ivy Unleashed podcast. Today is such a special day because we are sitting with one of my good friends who we've known each other for now almost 10 years, which is wild.
Don't say that out loud. Don't say it out loud. Just
I was thinking about it this morning. I'm like, it's kind of disgusting that we've been almost out of college for 10 years. And we're referring to Gaelin Elmore. Gaelin, welcome.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for opening up your studio to me and spending some time with me this morning.
Like I said, almost 10 years. Gaelin and I were in the same freshman orientation group. Gaelin was a football player at the University of Minnesota and then went on to play for the Bengals and, a little bit got signed. Last time I saw Gaelin, it was when he got the call and he was in Florida at a training camp and was like, hey, I can't stay here. I just got a call from the Bengals. Will you come pick me up?
Yep.
Yeah. And since then has taken a complete different journey, which we're so excited to get into. But I want to tell people how this all began, starting with your very first memory as a child, because I think it sets the scene perfect. So take us back to that moment.
So my first memory is not in the same category that I imagine most people's first memory would be in, right? Like when I think about it, I imagine it's like, oh, this really cool birthday party, or that time that your parents surprised you with a pet, or something like that. Mine is much more sad and much more traumatic than I hope most people's first memory would be. And it's of the first time I remember being taken from my family. And it wasn't, again, it's the first time I remember. It wasn't the first time it had happened. I had actually entered foster care at 5 months old. And so this time I'm about 4.5. I'm home with my mom. My two sisters were off at school. My dad was finishing up work, so he was still gone. And honestly, it was like those days were my favorite days. Like I was so excited to be home with just me and my mom. And I was a mama's boy, and I got to do whatever I want. Literally, as there were knocks on our front door, I was sitting on our couch eating cereal, like just kind of just kicking back, which I never would have done if my dad was home, right? Like we're in the 90s. I'm gonna date myself a little bit. We're in the 90s, and Rent-A-Center is a thing. So we have this rent-to-own fake leather couch, and if you spill on it, you can't take it back. You have to pay for it. So my dad would have found that, like, we're gonna have problems. Lets you know just kind of how free I would be at home with just me and my mom. And my mom was off in the apartment doing something, and there was a knock on the door. After the knock was a man's voice, one that I didn't know, and my mom like almost immediately appeared in the front living room. And she came over to the couch. She picked me up. I remember spilling my cereal. I was mad that I spilled my cereal, and I didn't know what was going on. Yeah, there was just this man on the other side who eventually said, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. And at that moment, it felt like my mom got the courage to open the door. She opened the door, and there was just kind of this arguing or like debating going back and forth. My mom's like begging or offering things to prevent him from taking me. And turns out this man was a caseworker for Department of Children and Family Services, and he ends up like physically taking me out of the arms of my mom. And I remember kicking and fighting and trying to do whatever I could to like get this man off me. And we turned the corner into the hallway of our apartment complex, and I saw policemen, and it was just like, oh, it's over. Like, there's nothing I can do. Mm-hmm. And he took me to his car. Again, we're in the 90s. It was a 2-door, little black car. There was no back seat. He puts me in the front seat, buckles me in. He's like, wait here. I'm going to go get your stuff. And eventually he comes back. And while he was gone, I was just thinking, how can I make this better? Like, how can I fix this or stop this from happening? What can I do? And really, it was just like, you know what? I can't do much, but if he doesn't come back and he doesn't make me feel safe or better, he doesn't make me feel better about what's happening, then I'm just going to shut everybody out. I'm just going to like not talk. I'm not going to behave the way people want me to behave. I'm not going to let anyone think that me not being with my family is okay. And so he came back, threw my stuff in the back seat. He offered me a toy, which I remember thinking was like, that's a good start. Like, cool. I get a toy out of this, like, bet. I ended up grabbing a Venom action figure, and we started to drive away. And I remember thinking, I was like, that was really fast. Like, we're just leaving. We lived in a cul-de-sac, so we went to the end of the cul-de-sac and turned around. And as we turned back up the street, my mom was on the front lawn being restrained by the police officers. And I'm looking over the driver's side to look at our apartment, or the front lawn of our apartment. And my caseworker just like didn't look at me, didn't say anything. He just reached for the radio and turned it up, and we kept driving. And that was it. I was like, okay, I'm in it. The only thing I can do is control like how I act, and I'm not letting anybody in. Led to a long journey throughout foster care and throughout multiple different placements, homes, experiences that forever shaped and changed how I saw the world, who I am, in my childhood.
So you were 4 when this happened, and you said
Yep.
when you're 5 months is when you first entered. So how many different homes were you placed, and how many times are you back with your parents and then taken away from them?
So I didn't know some of that information until a couple of years ago when I got access to my own file. So, which was a really hard thing to go through. I had it for months before I even opened it. So my parents had told me for a long time I didn't go into foster care until I was 1. I actually was at risk of being taken at birth, and then they took me at 5 months. And so when I got back with my parents when I was 1, and then I was taken away again at 1.5 years, got back with them at 2, taken again about like 4 months later, got back with them when I was a little bit older than 3.5. And then I was taken away again at 4.5. And that was kind of the last time that my family was a unit. Like my parents ended up divorcing. Me and my sisters would never live in a home with my parents ever again. Like we just would never be whole again. There were times that I got reunified, but I was just with my mom. There were times when I was older where I got reunified, but I was just with my dad. And me and my sisters were all over the place. So I actually don't know the official number of homes I stayed in. I know the minimum. And the minimum is at least 19.
Oh, wow. And
so,
what's happening so that, like, why are they taking you?
So for those that may not truly understand foster care is like government intervention for families that are incapable of taking care of their children and either keeping them safe, healthy, protecting them, providing, all of those things. So there's a number of reasons. Like someone might get placed into foster care for like showing up to school with bruises on them. Someone might go into foster care because they snuck out of the house at 3 a.m. in the morning and someone found them multiple hours later. And so the government's like, hey, you clearly can't watch your kids and take care of them. We need to take them from you. That time that we went back into foster care, my dad and my mom were both struggling addicts and alcoholics, but they were pretty high functioning, meaning like they had jobs and they worked. And when they didn't work, they partied really, really hard. And it feels like a socioeconomic response, right? Because we all know people, especially being an adult now, we all know people who party hard. Like it's just something that people do. Mm-hmm. But for my parents, it became something that was like, you can't take care of your kids if you do that. And so my dad actually went to go get like community services support to get clean when they reported him and our family. And then that's why we were taken again. So in this moment of trying to seek assistance and help and support, that's when we were taken and our family kind of changed forever. There are a lot of reasons that might have been happening, whether it's like when your system involved, they have the right to just kind of drop in on you, see what's happening. What does the house look like? Are the kids fed? Are they clean? Like all these things. And so there are multiple times that in my file, like someone dropped in and we just weren't clean enough or taken care of, or the house wasn't orderly, or maybe my mom was not around or something. And they just was like, all right, well, we got to put you back into foster care. So many homes in the first like by the time I was 6, I stayed in the majority of my homes, right? Like every time I went back to my family and then was taken, and I was essentially placed in a new foster home. And so that just kind of became my normal very early on in life.
And what were these homes like that you were staying in? What were those experiences like?
Early on, I remember them being good, but I just remember being so committed to like being bad, right? Like so committed to making it as hard as possible on people because I didn't want to be adopted. I didn't want to not be with my family. And so I remember like being as difficult as I could. And so like some of those early ones were really, really good. They were. And some of the later ones were all right. But there was one foster home I stayed in from 6 years old until I was almost 12 that was physically and emotionally abusive, by far the worst home that I ever stayed in. But it's also still to this point in my life, the single place that I stayed in the longest in my entire life. Yeah, it was, for lack of a better word, hell for most of my childhood, and just cemented this idea that I can't trust adults, and I can't, like when I let people in, it complicates things, where as long as I'm in control, I have a chance to control my emotions, my feelings, what other people see, if I'm let down or not. Like if I'm in control of what happens, at least emotionally and relationally in my life, it didn't matter if I wasn't with my family. It didn't matter if I was being abused. It didn't matter all the bad stuff that could happen, as long as I could control those things. And that's what I really focused on as a kid.
Oh, man. It's like so heartbreaking because I'm a mom and like
Yeah.
my kids are these ages, and just the being ripped away from your parent, like, oh, it is just like a knife in my chest right now. And so I'm thinking about that process of like knowing there's a good chance I'll get to go back home, but there's also a good chance like you're in a home for 6 years. Like when do you start to lose hope? Like, oh my gosh, maybe I never will get to be with my parents, or did they get to visit? Like, what's that like?
You have visitations. There are just like moments where you're like, okay, this changes everything. One of those moments, I watched my mom testify in court and give up her parental rights. So like, again, part of like being a parent is that you have the legal right to parent your children. When you become system involved, when you become someone who the child welfare system has oversight over you, they get to determine if you have that legal right anymore. My mom and dad split and got divorced. And so then it became not only a fight with the state to get custody of me, but a fight with each other. So it became a custody battle with 3 parties. And so it's like, my mom just doesn't lose me to my dad. She could lose me to the system, and vice versa for my dad.
Why are you in the courtroom though? I feel like, you're a little kid.
Yeah. I mean, the courtroom was always super weird because I'm here, and at this age, I'm with my abuser, right? Like I'm with the person that I feel the most unsafe with in the world. I'm in court with them, sitting on one side, and I'm like, I can only look at my dad on the other side. There's no real like true interaction until after court has happened. It's a super like just strange environment.
Did your parents know that you were being abused?
Kind of, but we're talking early 90s, early 2000s. It's like abuse wasn't really like, kids didn't have voices, right? Mm-hmm. So it's just like, oh, you don't like
you're being
disciplined.
Yeah.
You don't like structure. You don't like being like, you're a foster kid. So you have bad behavior and they need to correct you. Like, so it's just like all of this removing the voice and the perspective of the kid going through it. So, and my parents grew up in trauma. My mom was on her own at 12 years old, like literally put out of the house by my grandma at 12 years old. My dad entered the army at 16, enlisted at 16, joined and went to like boot camp at 17. They don't know anything but trauma. Mm-hmm. So like for them to like hear me say about what I'm doing, they're like, you have a roof over your head. You have like all these things. And it's this whole idea that like, there's that popular saying of hurt people, right? And I feel like most people, when they hear that, think it through a lens of like intentionally hurting someone else or feeling related. But the reality is, if I can't come from a place of like being healed, then I can't help someone else heal. Like I'm going to perpetuate the same things that I've gone through.
Totally.
And so there was this lack of awareness on my parents' side of things as they were still battling to like get us back. My mom really, really got an insight into it after that court case. So my mom testified on behalf of me and my sisters being adopted by our abuser in the state and testified against my dad from getting me back. So her kind of agreement was if she gives up her parental rights voluntarily, that we'll all be adopted, we'll stay in the same home, and she'll have access to us. She'll get to come see us. She'll get to like do holidays. Essentially, she still gets to have a relationship with us without having to parent us. And so for her, it was like, I may never get clean. I may never get my act together, but I can still have a relationship with my kids. So I'm going to do that. So I'm sitting in court. She testifies against my dad. And I just feel so betrayed.
And you're how old at this time?
I'm 6.5. Just feel so betrayed. Mm-hmm. And it's just like, I'm a mama's boy. Like, why are you like advocating for them? And why are you going against my dad? That was a pillar moment of like, yeah, our family's long gone. Like the happy.
What is family now? Like,
yeah.
My protector is not protecting me. This is supposed to be my new family who's also not protecting me. Like, what happened with your dad?
So both of my parents' rights got terminated that day. My 2 sisters were adopted on the spot. I wasn't adopted. I was pending adoption because my dad appealed. He immediately appealed. And it created years of a process of appeals for him to like not allow me to officially be adopted. Within months, my sisters' names were changed. They were like, and then my mom was in our home. Like she would still get access to us, but the abuse didn't stop when she was around. She had no voice, right? She's not an active parent anymore. She has no legal right to be a parent. So she is in our home watching us be abused. She is like, and can't do anything. Otherwise, it's like, you won't get to see your kids. Like I get to choose if you see them or not. And so it's this like, it's one thing to no longer be able to go back with your parent. It's another thing for them not to have authority in your life, right? Like I'm actively watching her not have a voice in my life. The person that I was most connected and attached to, you can't do anything. And so it starts to change my relationship with you. It's like, you're just here. Like, and then through all that, my mom starts to deal with breast cancer and she's like battling cancer. She's like dealing with all this stuff. So she literally started to live with us because she couldn't work. She had no place to go. She lived with us. And like, I'm sleeping in a room and my mom's sleeping on a pull-out couch. And I would sneak out at night to sleep with my mom and then wake up really early to go back in my bed and act like nothing ever happened. And so it really became super weird. My dad went on his own journey of like struggling with the decision, struggling with the process, relapsing, trying to get clean, get back into our life. Even my file to this day just talks about him in a way where like they were never advocating for my dad to get me back. That was never something in their mind. If anything, people that were my caseworker or visitation specialist working for the state or the county would write in their notes of like, don't know why this is taking so long. Like why do they keep letting like Gaelin be in the in-between? Like they really wanted me to be adopted. And there were times where I wanted to be adopted because I wanted it to be over. I wanted to know, like, where am I? Why do I not have the same experiences as my sisters? Why am I like the only one? Why am I not wanted, right? Like, why can't this happen for me? And so it was really, really hard to process and took me well into my adulthood to like really start to process what the impacts all those things had on me.
So you're with this family until you're 12.
Just about.
And then you hit middle school. What were your middle school and high school years like as you're being abused, bopping around from family to family?
I was there until like the end of my 5th grade year. Me and one of my sisters who was adopted. So context, I have 2 sisters that were adopted in this home. And my older sister, who is 7 years older than me, 2 years after her adoption was finalized, she ran away. and she was gone. At 14, she ran away. I didn't see her for basically a year. She was gone that long. They didn't find her. They stopped looking. They emancipated my sister at 15. So they were like, okay, stop. Like,
They just stopped looking?
they just like were like, okay, you win. You are emancipated. And she just lived life on her own. Next time I saw her, she had my nephew. And so she was a teen mom, 15, 16 years old. We just on Thursday moved that nephew into college.
Wow.
Like and I was an uncle before that, but my sister had a baby when I was 8, 9 years old. So she got emancipated. So it was just me and my other sister in this home. We ended up running away when I was 11 and she was 14, and we were gone for over a month. We had stayed at a bunch of different random houses, friends, garages, and eventually we ran out of places, started to stay at parks, under bridges, turned ourselves in. That launched an investigation, which finally, like, our voices were heard. Got all the adoptions in the house terminated. Everyone was split up within days, and like all of a sudden I was back in contact with my dad. So like now I'm having visitations again, and within a year I was living with him full time. He had custody of me again. So going into 7th grade, I'm with my dad, but immediately we struggle, like, financially. We're thrust into poverty. So we were housing insecure for 7th, 8th, and 9th grade. 8th grade year, I lived out of our car for half of that school year. 9th grade, we stayed anywhere we could, from dance studios to bars to a random person's like single bedroom in their home. But I was with my dad, and we were figuring it out, and things were starting to get better. And then my sophomore year of high school, my dad got arrested, and I was committed to dropping out of high school. I was like, you know what? My sister got emancipated 2 years before this. I had way more schooling than her. I can get my GED, get emancipated, live life on my own. I was an honor roll student, like star athlete in our school, and small town, but star athlete. I was ready to throw it all away because I wanted to just like be in control. I was like, all right, whatever. I'll get a job at the gas station. Like, I believed in myself, and psychotic or enough way. I had so much belief in myself. I was like, I could figure it out. Like, life will be all right. Yeah, my high school coach didn't let that happen and offered for me to move in with them, which I originally said no. And eventually, like, they were persistent enough that I did, and that became home for the rest of high school.
I keep thinking about coaches and teachers, like what they know about where you're living. Are you moving different schools? Are you staying in the same school majority of the time? And like,
Did they know you were sleeping in your car?
yeah, like, did they know the extent of what was going on?
No. So when I was in the abusive home, I was in the same school for 1st through 6th grade. Like, that was one school, and I love that. I thrived at that school. It saved. I would arguably say that school saved my life, because I was going through some of the darkest times at home, but like there was this like ability to take deep breaths at school and be myself and figure out who I was and show my personality, and not just be in this like with this dark cloud over me all the time. 7th grade, I got back with my dad, new school. 8th grade, new school. 9th grade, new school. And I had gotten really good at like keeping people out, right? Like if anything, it was like this, I felt so much pride in the ability to go through really hard stuff at home and then show up at school and no one knew. My ability to keep it together, I felt really cool about. I'm cracking up the class in art in first hour of the day, and no one knows that I just got ready in a gas station bathroom.
I'm sure part of you didn't want to be that person. Like, you could be someone else when you were at school.
Yeah. Like, I can turn off the survival mode for a little bit. And school became this like opportunity to perform. And home was like, I need to like survive. And so when I got that break, I took it. And it was just like, I'm going to joke, I'm going to laugh, I'm going to get my work done. But I didn't have to really try that hard, because school came naturally to me. And I was just like, I'm going to have fun while I'm here. Sometimes a lot of times it got me into trouble, but like, I was going to be a kid. And so I was dead set on no one knowing. I didn't want anyone to know. And there have been times earlier in my life and experience where I had like kind of like tested the waters of like, what would you do if I said something like this? and nothing ever really came of it, where it was like, oh, I don't think they can do anything, right? Like, I might as well just like keep those two things separate. Only time teachers really knew was when I had no control. Like if I didn't have control over like the information they got or what was happening, yeah, they know. And then that was actually the most stressful situation for me, because it's like, man, now these two things are colliding. Like I'm not going to be able to come here and act like that's not happening. I have to be in that, like I have to bring home here. So those moments were always like super frustrating and super stressful. And it's like people are going to look at me different. Like teachers are going to ask questions. I got to talk about it, which is a lot harder to talk about than just like not and live in it, right? It's like when you're not doing well, someone asks you how you're doing, then you start crying. It's like
I was fine before you asked.
I was holding it together, and now you want to make me talk about my feelings. So that's how I went about it. And when I was a sophomore, they found out my dad was arrested before I did. I hadn't seen my dad for almost 4 days. Like I talked to him Friday when I left for school. He was gone Friday, Saturday, Sunday, went to school Monday. And they called me down to the office and asked me like, hey, have you talked to him? And I was like, my dad? And they're like, yeah, when's the last time you spoke to him? I was like, oh, this morning. Mm-hmm. And they were like, oh, like, how'd you talk to him? And I was like, when I left for school. What do you mean? And then eventually like they realized that, or they knew I was lying, and I found out they knew I was lying. And then things kind of spiraled from there. But they only found that out because they found out before I did. Otherwise, I would have kept going home by myself and just trying to like keep things up as long as I could until I figured out what happened to my dad. So yeah, that was just kind of my mindset. And
so your high school coach takes you in, your friend Reggie.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
I remember Reggie. Oh man, he was fun. They take you in and you have a sense of a home.
Is Reggie the high school football coach's son?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. They had 3 kids, oldest son, Rocky, and then they had twin boy and girl, Reggie and Mikkel. And they were a year older than me. So I was already friends with them before, knew them. Actually had been over to their house, like hanging out, doing stuff with the groups of people. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't like we hated each other. Like I knew them. They were cool. Like we were friends.
And what was that like, going into their home?
It was different, right? Like one, it's not like they had a family meeting and was like, hey, are we bringing Gaelin home? It was, my coach was just like, hey, Gaelin's coming home. Like, get the room ready. And so it wasn't like everyone was moving in lockstep in what was happening. And you know what it's like I imagine you know what it's like to live with your best friend. It's not a good idea. Like people don't just say that. Like you live with people, you start to realize like, I don't really like you as much as I thought I did. And it just created conflict because their normal changed. Their home changed. Their dynamic changed. And I empathize with that. I went into it as like, this is temporary. We'll get through basketball season, school year will end or something, and they'll move me to a actual foster home, and I'll run away from there and figure it out. I had too much respect for him and their family to be disrespectful to them, but for better part of a year, I was a subletter in their house. Like I was just there. I wasn't part of their family. They forced me to do dinner with them. I would come down for dinner in the evening and go right back up to my room. And that was it for a long time. So although I had like a physical home, I didn't feel like it was mine. And a lot of that had more to do with my experience in foster care than it did with the family that was opening their home to me. I just, like, that was the routine. It was like, if anything, there were people who signed up to do this, to bring kids into their home, that gave up on me within weeks. Like, you didn't go through any training, any licensing. You don't do this. Mm-hmm. You're going to get rid of me really quickly. And it just, that point never came.
Okay, so you're with him the rest of high school then?
Yes, my dad, the charges on my dad ended up getting dropped, and right before our state championship game, my junior year of football season. And
were you a state champ?
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah, my dad got to see me win a ring, get yourself one of these. Yeah, it was great. It was a really cool moment, and I thought my dad get out, I'd start living with him again. But my dad told me no. And right away it was like triggering. It was like, what do you mean no? Mm-hmm. Like, it's me and you. Like, you're my family. Get me out of this house. Mm-hmm. But my dad was like, no, you're doing good. Like, you're succeeding. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. So he lived in this little extended stay studio bedroom. It was like, I'm not going anywhere. I'll be at your games. We'll still do dinner. We'll do stuff. But you're doing well there. Stay. And so I was like, okay, I will. And 3 months later, had my first scholarship offer to the University of Minnesota. Recruiting just like took off, and then it felt like my future was like finally in front of me.
You get signed as a D1 athlete.
Yeah.
From where you came from, what was that feeling like?
It was bittersweet, right? Like I often say, I don't know how other people look at their lives, right? I don't know the lens or the expectations you have for it. But for me, I always expected like the good moments to feel like movies. I always like, that's always as a kid. And really movies were an outlet for me to dream as a kid. So it was like when I watch a movie, I'm like picturing myself as an underdog. And it's just like, man, what happens when I get that? And just like everything being perfectly aligned. A week before I signed my national letter of intent, my dad got arrested again. I'm about, like, this is supposed to be the cinematic moment where me and my dad get to celebrate everything we've been through. And now when I sign, I have to take a picture with all people I haven't known longer than 3 years. Like, yeah, they're helpful. They were impactful. They're important parts of my story. But it's just like, this isn't how it was supposed to be. Like, it was supposed to be better than this. And so it was anticlimactic in that way. And every kind of milestone continued to be that, because I didn't feel like I belonged with the people I cared about the most. And so even reaching the mountaintop felt super lonely. And it was just like, I'm doing this to like be with people that I care about. Mm-hmm. Like at the end of the day, I'm trying to make it to the NFL to provide for my family. Like, so that we can be together, so that all the stuff that we experienced in my childhood doesn't matter anymore.
You're trying to be the hero of the story.
Yeah, literally. And so my nephews and nieces don't know anything different. This is why I'm doing it. But every time I get somewhere, it's like this new awakening or this new awareness to like, it'll never be what you think it will. And so like literally like playing on Saturdays, well, my family can't be there. Financially, they just can't afford it. So like I'm having success on the field, but they don't get to cherish that with me. It's people who have invested in me who I'm thankful for, but it's not the people in my head that I always envisioned would be there. And so it's just, them being there is a reminder of who's not. And so it's just so hard, because both things can be true. I can be thankful for what they've done for me and helped me get here. I can also be sad that the people I want to be there are not. And I didn't have words to ever communicate that as a younger, I wasn't a kid, but I was a kid, right? I didn't have the words to communicate that. And so each step, it continued to feel that way all the way up to the point of the NFL. Like, just like, man, it doesn't get much higher than this. Mm-hmm. And I still feel like that kid sitting in the car when I was 4, like, I want someone to make this better. Like, that's it. I want someone to make me feel safe. I want someone to make me feel like I belong, that I matter. And I'm just a lot heavier, a lot bigger, some facial hair, and it's the same thing. And so it's just like, how much longer am I going to chase this? And at what point am I going to shift and stop being so concerned about what other people can do for me and start working on healing on my own? And that's when my life shifted. So signing the NFL contract, thought it was going to be that cinematic moment again. And it was just like, it was the worst, like, initial 5 minutes, like, really of my life.
What?
Of, like, literally just signed the contract, faxed it over, figuring out my plans to fly out of Tampa. And I call my family, like my mom and dad separately. I call them. And it was just like this last kind of punch to the gut of, you don't know me. Like, we're no longer the same, right? Those moments growing up of realizing like, oh, my family will never be the same. Like, you kind of knew it, but you didn't accept it. Mm-hmm. And it was just like, that was the moment. It was just like, I can't bring that back to life. Like, it's not going to happen. No matter how much money I get, what fame, what level status I achieve, it's not going to happen. Mm-hmm. I don't know them. They don't know me. And so I need to figure out who I am. And then maybe the people who are supposed to be in my life will be in my life. The invitation will be open for them. Mm-hmm. but I'm no longer like turning other guests away to be a part of my life in order for them to fill the seats. Like it was an exclusive entry of like, my family's supposed to be here. And at that point, it was just like, you know what? I got to work on me. And then whoever is here. And I'm okay with that. And so very quickly, my love for my willingness to commit and work hard at being in the NFL was gone. And I say that like, I didn't play in the NFL. I signed a contract, which I'm very thankful for. I'm proud of. There are people who I felt like were phenomenal, like athletes, football players that didn't. And I'm very grateful for it. But I knew at that moment, it was just like, it's going to take everything and more that I have to commit to being here, to make it. Because I wasn't the most supreme athlete there ever was. Like, there are guys who are blessed to walk out of bed and can walk into a football field and they're the best player out there. That wasn't me. I needed to work to be there, to continue to be there. And I knew I didn't have it left in me to continue to invest, because the outcome of giving all that wasn't what I thought it would be for so long. And so it was just like, yeah, it's gone. Like, I love the game, respect all the people who play it, but it can't give me what I hoped it would. And so I ended up leaving before my rookie year really even started. Right before camp, I called, didn't have a job lined up, called Cincinnati and was like, hey, I'm not coming back. And started to figure out my life and my process to figuring out who I was and what I wanted to be.